Right now, today, $84 trillion is about to change hands in this country. The biggest transfer of wealth in American history, according to Cerulli Associates. And here's the part almost nobody talks about. Research from the Williams Group found 70% of that money is gone by the second generation. 90% of it is gone by the third. Not because anyone made a bad investment, not because the stock market crashed. It disappears because families never actually talk about it. Somebody builds something, a business, a house, a nest egg, and then the conversation just stops. No plan gets written down. No number gets explained. The kids inherit the money, but not the instructions. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly how a real family's fortune gets cut down to almost nothing in just 2 generations. Using real math, you can check yourself, and exactly what it actually takes to be the family that keeps it instead of losing it. Meet Jake. He's 28, lives in Denver, Colorado, and for most of his life, he genuinely thought his family was one of the lucky ones. His grandfather started out in the early 80s with a single one-bay garage, fixing transmissions for whoever walked in off the street. By the time he retired, that one garage had turned into 3 auto repair shops across the city, and when he passed away, the estate was valued at around $2.4 million. That's real, life-changing money, the kind of number that's supposed to set up a whole family for good. Here's the thing, though. By the time that money worked its way down to Jake's dad's generation, more than half of it was already gone. Nobody stole it. Nobody blew it on anything reckless. It just eroded. A business buyout that got badly mismanaged, an estate tax bill nobody planned for ahead of time, a partner in the business nobody had properly vetted, and underneath all of it, a family that never once sat down and had a real structured conversation about any of it. Jake actually found this out at his cousin's wedding of all places, standing near the bar with a plate of food he wasn't really eating. Overhearing his uncle mention a number that didn't come close to matching what Jake had always just assumed the family was worth. He didn't say anything that night. He just smiled, nodded along with the toast, and went home replaying that one sentence over and over, trying to figure out how a number that size could just quietly shrink without anyone ever mentioning it. Be honest. Does your family actually sit down and talk about money? Or does it just quietly get passed down in silence, generation after generation? Drop it in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious how common this actually is. And if any part of that story sounds a little too familiar, go ahead and hit subscribe. I break down one real number like this every single week. So why does this keep happening? And not just to Jake's family, but to families across the entire country? According to Cerulli Associates, an estimated $84 trillion is projected to pass from older generations to younger ones over the next couple of decades, and more than half of that is coming from baby boomers alone. On top of that, the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances shows that Americans aged 70 and older currently control roughly a third of all household wealth in the country. Generation X, according to that same Cerulli data, actually stands to inherit the single largest share of assets transferred to heirs over the next couple of decades, which means this exact scenario is quietly playing out in millions of households right now, not just occasionally. So this isn't some small, isolated trend. It's an enormous historic shift, and financial institutions have spent years and serious money preparing systems, advisors, and products specifically for it. Families generally haven't done anything close to that same preparation. Interestingly, Cerulli's own research on high net worth advisory practices found that family meetings and regular communication are considered the single most effective wealth transfer planning strategy, ahead of tax structuring, ahead of trusts, ahead of everything else on that list. The actual fix, in other words, isn't some complicated financial instrument. It's a conversation. Most families just never schedule it. Based on research from the Williams and Pricer study on family wealth transitions, the erosion pattern is remarkably consistent no matter how the fortune was originally built. A business, real estate, a stock portfolio, it doesn't matter. 70% of it disappears by the second generation. 90% is gone by the third. And here's the part that really matters. The researchers found the primary cause is almost never poor investment decisions. It's a plain lack of preparation, financial literacy, and honest communication inside the family itself. Think of inherited wealth like a family recipe that only ever gets passed down as a finished dish, never as an actual written recipe card. The first generation lived through every single ingredient, every failed batch, every adjustment they had to make along the way. They know exactly why it works. The second generation just gets handed a plate. It tastes great. They have no real idea how fragile the whole thing actually is, or what it took to make it in the first place. And there's a quieter, more human reason this keeps repeating. Talking about money, especially inherited money, feels genuinely awkward for almost everyone involved. Parents don't want to seem like they're keeping score with their own kids. Kids don't want to seem greedy or impatient by even bringing it up. So the conversation just never happens. Not out of malice, just out of everyone assuming someone else will eventually start it. If this is already making you rethink the silence in your own family, go ahead and tap that like button right now. It takes 1 second and it genuinely helps more people catch this before it's already too late for them. Let's actually run Jake's family's numbers, because the math here is the whole point. Generation 1, Jake's grandfather's estate, valued at $2.4 million, right here in Denver, back when he passed in the mid-'80s. Generation 2, based on that 70% erosion figure from the Williams and Pricer research, Jake's dad's generation ended up with somewhere around $700,000. Still meaningful money, no question, but call it roughly a third of where it started. Generation 3, Jake's generation, right now, today. If that same 90% cumulative pattern holds all the way through, the family is on pace to land somewhere around $240,000 total. From $2.4 million down to $240,000. In 2 generations, without one single dramatic mistake anybody could actually point a finger at. Now here's the number that should really sting. If that original $2.4 million had simply been invested and left alone, no panic selling, no mismanagement, just historical U.S. stock market averages of around 7% a year for 40 years, it could have grown to somewhere close to $36 million. That's based on historical averages, not a promise of what markets will do going forward. But the formula itself is simple and checkable. Future value equals the starting amount, times 1 plus the rate, raised to the number of years. 2.4 million at 7%, compounded over 40 years, lands right around $35.9 million. For context, Cerulli's projections show millennial households alone are expected to inherit more than $27 trillion by 2045. Jake's generation isn't some rare exception standing at this exact crossroads. Millions of households are standing at some version of the same one right now, most of them without realizing it. And here's one more checkpoint worth adding, because it actually changes the whole tone of this video. If Jake's family starts the planning conversation today, right now at Generation 3, with that remaining $240,000, and simply avoids repeating the same silence for the next 30 years, even modest, historically average growth could turn that $240,000 into something closer to $1.8 million by the time it reaches Jake's own kids. Not $36 million, but not zero either. The family doesn't need to get back everything that was lost, and honestly, it probably never fully will. It just needs to stop the exact same pattern from quietly repeating one more time. Here's the psychology behind why families keep skipping this conversation, even when, deep down, most of them probably know they should have it. Behavioral researchers call it optimism bias, a concept first studied by psychologist Neil Weinstein, and it's the very human tendency to assume bad outcomes happen to other people, not to us specifically. Every single family quietly believes their family's the exception. Every family assumes their kids will just naturally handle the money well, that nobody's going to make it awkward, that there's plenty of time to have the real conversation later, and that bias gets reinforced by something else. Talking about money and mortality in the same breath feels genuinely uncomfortable for almost everyone. Nobody wants to sit their still healthy parents down and ask detailed questions about a will or a trust. So the comfortable feeling of, we're fine, we'll figure it out eventually, just quietly rides along year after year, right up until the money's already gone and there's nothing left to plan around. Jake's family wasn't unusual in any of this. Nobody in that family was careless or foolish. His dad genuinely loved his own father and never once meant to let anything slip away. They just kept assuming we'll get to it would still be true later. In about a minute, that comfortable feeling of everything being fine is going to feel very different for you too, because there's actually a straightforward way to be the family that keeps it instead. Quick reminder, this video is for educational purposes only and is not financial advice. Check the description for full details. So what actually breaks a pattern that's apparently this consistent across families? Not a bigger inheritance, not a smarter investing app. Genuinely, it's three specific things, and Jake started with the first one the week after that wedding. First, he just asked. He set up one actual sit-down conversation with his dad. No dramatic speech, no confrontation, just an honest conversation about what the estate actually looks like now, what's realistically left, and whether there's any kind of plan in place at all. That single conversation is the exact thing roughly 70% of families, according to the research, apparently skip entirely. From there, instead of just letting whatever remains sit passively in a regular account the way it had before, Jake's family brought in an actual estate planning professional, someone who could set up proper structure, whether that's a trust, a documented plan, or simply a clear written record of who owns what and why. So the money isn't just floating there quietly waiting to erode the same way it did last time around. It wasn't a one-hour fix either. It took a few sessions, some paperwork nobody enjoyed filling out, and one slightly tense conversation about who would eventually be in charge of what. But that's exactly the kind of tension the Williams and Pricer research says most families avoid entirely, right up until it's too late to avoid it. And the third piece is the one families miss the most often. Jake started talking to his own younger cousins about all of this now, early, while it's still just an ordinary conversation and not an emergency scramble. So whatever does eventually get passed down again, it comes with the actual instructions attached this time, not just a number sitting in a bank account. Jake's own first week doing any of this wasn't glamorous at all. One honest dinner conversation, one phone call to a planner. That's genuinely the whole starting point. But based on the research, that's also exactly the gap between the 90% and the roughly 10%. Not the size of the original number, but whether anyone in the family was ever willing to actually talk about it out loud. $84 trillion is coming, one way or another. Whether your own family ends up in that 90% or in the smaller group that actually keeps what was built, has almost nothing to do with the size of the number and everything to do with whether anyone's willing to actually talk about it. One more thing, if you haven't caught lease versus buy, the 5-year number nobody calculates, yet that's a perfect follow-up to this one. If this one hit a little close to home, go ahead and subscribe, drop a comment on the one thing your own family's never actually talked about, and send this to the relative who genuinely needs to see it. Keep pushing forward, stay disciplined, and I will genuinely see you in the very next one. Growbit US.